When I started really getting into beer, I started getting into good beer, so like import beer, and then the first wave of craft brewing was starting to hit, and I realized this is expensive. So that was one of the reasons I started trying to make it at home. It took me a while, and I made some really bad beers. But I also made some pretty good beers too, and I got to a point to where I was making this brown ale that I would make all the time, and it was kind of my house beer. And then lo and behold, a homebrew supply shop opened up in College Station, and they started putting on homebrew competitions, and I started winning them. I think those awards had a lot to do with landing my first job at St. Arnold. I started brewing in 1997, learning under the head brewer and brewmaster Pete Nordlow. At that point in time, they were the only brewery around. As I worked at St. Arnold for a while, I started seeing that I would do things a little bit differently. I think all brewers do that, although it's not your brewery, so you can't just jump out and do something different because you're not in charge. You're making the beer, but not the decisions. I was kind of in a quandary. I started having the idea of starting this, but I also had a full-time job, obviously, as the head brewer. My dad, and he's the first one that said, well, why don't you start a brewery? And I thought, that's crazy, Dad. You know, it's like, why would I leave a stable job to do that? Yeah, he kind of pushed a little bit, and I started working on this kind of on my spare time, and that was a conflict of interest, and rightly so. I got let go from my job. And I called him and I said, Dad, we're committed now. I just lost my job. He said, good, let's get to work. He was a gas line engineer, and that first brewery, we did everything. All the pipes that we put in there were just Schedule 80 pipes that we hand threaded, put together, and just drew it all in, and it worked like a charm. Southern Star sold its first batch of beer in late February 2008. And I don't know how many breweries were in Texas when I started, but I would say probably production breweries, maybe 20. But then all of a sudden in 2008, 2009, and then you got in 2010, you saw this massive upswing of craft breweries opening. Our first beer was Pine Belt Pale Ale, and we decided to take a different approach by putting it into cans instead of putting it into bottles, and thus becoming the first craft brewery in Texas to can beer. But our company didn't really take off until we made Bombshell Blonde. And we couldn't buy equipment fast enough to meet demand. Bombshell Blonde is an interesting beer. It's very simple. It's one of those beers that's more than the sum of its parts. And we do have a special hop that we use at the very end of it to give it its distinct flavor. Not only have we run out of space, but we've maxed out the entire electrical load for the whole building. That was the biggest fear, is knowing that we were going to outgrow this place and we'd have to make a commitment, a big commitment, and purchase a brewery and build one from the ground up. We're on 13.5 acres, kind of nestled in between I-45 and Main Street in Conroe, called Fraser. We went from a 15-barrel brew house to a 60-barrel brew house, so we quintupled the size of our brew house. We doubled the size of our fermenters. We went from 60-barrel fermenters to 120-barrel fermenters, and they're a lot bigger. This tap room has been great for us. It really helps bring people into a comfortable environment and introduce them to our beer. It also gives us a venue to put some extremely rare stuff on the tap wall to get some customer feedback. And really what we want to do is make it kind of a neighborhood place to where people can come with their families and have a good time. We're also open outside. We've got our beer garden. We just got a permanent stage put up out there not too terribly long ago. It's covered permanent stage. We're in a position to where we can kind of stretch out a little bit, and it's time for us to kind of settle in and become more just an establishment of our community. I like to look at this brewery and its employees as a family. We all work very closely together. We rely on each other for creativity, for ideas. Hopefully we can run this thing and I can retire, but I hope to be doing this for quite some time. I'm having a lot of fun doing it.